Hi people, welcome to Literature Vidya. Today we are going to deal with the concept of the theatre of absurd. This is an important topic for the UGC NET exam as well as the other competitive exams dealing with English literature. In this video, we are going to deal with the what, where, how, and why of the theatre of absurd. So let's begin the detailed analysis of the topic. So, in this topic, we first deal with the who. The term theatre of absurd was coined by Martin Esslin. Martin Esslin is a British dramatist, and he, in his essay, The Theatre of Absurd, written in 1961, where he initially presented four defining playwrights who belong to the genre. They are Samuel Beckett, Arthur Adamov, Eugenides Ionesco, Jean Genet, and later added the fifth playwright, Harold Pinter. Other playwrights who are associated with the genre of theatre of absurd are French Kafka, Edward Albee, Tom Stoppard, Joseph Keller, Jean Genet, and a lot of them. One important person associated with the theatre of absurd is also Albert Camus, and his most famous work, The Myth of Sisyphus, which was published in the year 1942, and it was originally written in French. It was published in English in 1955. Before I move forward, I would like to tell you all that all the highlighted text is important and needs to be learned by heart, especially the important authors, their books, and the chronology associated. Now, let's deal with what is the theatre of absurd. The term theatre of absurd itself tells that we are talking about the late 19th century and the 20th century, where the human condition was essentially absurd. It is believed that the theatre of absurd began in the 19th century with Alfred Jarry's French play, Ubi Roy, Ubi the King. But it came into prominence only after the Second World War, that is, in the 20th century. In the theatre of absurd, we see human as an isolated being. So there is condition of isolation, hollowness, meaninglessness. If we try to present it geometrically, it's basically a circle. It starts at the same point where it ends. It is a movement from nothingness to nothingness and ends into silence. Now, whenever a movement begins or something new comes about, there's always a history to it. Now, if we look what happened that led to the origin of the theatre of absurd. So, the movement is said to officially begin in France post the World War II that happened from 1939 to 1945. And this is said to be a sort of rebellion that was against the traditional beliefs and the values. So now the question is, what is the tradition? The tradition believed human to be a rational creature who lived in an intelligible universe and was a part of the social structure. He behaved a certain way and was able to mingle with each other or maybe even understand the emotional thinking of the other person. But now something happened, that was the World War. And World War changed things around. People saw bloodshed, hatred, destruction, horror, and it filled the hearts of man with that sense of isolation. They believed that there was no inherent truth and there was no actual meaning in life. So they were entangled in those threads of meaninglessness. The theatre of absurd has its roots in movements like the Expressionism, Surrealism, and deep roots into existentialism. It is believed that the theatre of absurd and existential movement were contemporaries to each other. Now, if we think, what was a precursor to all this? If we are asked this question, like what was a precursor or what was the influence to the theatre of absurd? So the answer is the father of English literature, William Shakespeare, and his tragic comedies. The theatre of absurd has high influence of his tragic comedies. And we can see the influence very clearly in Eugenides Ionesco, Macbeth, and Tom Stoppard, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern are dead. Let's deal with the characteristics of the theatre of absurd. The play involves normally a protagonist who's a lost man, and all the actions that he does are senseless, absurd, and useless. Now we're going to take examples from Samuel Beckett's play. Here we're taking example from his play Waiting for Godot, which was written in 1953 in French, right? And here we have two major characters, that's Astrogen and Waldemar, right? And they're waiting for an unknown person, that's Godot. But basically nothing comes to an end, right? They're always waiting, and waiting. And that is why at the end, Astrogen says, nothing comes, nothing goes. It's awful. Another characteristics is that you'll normally find that the setting is grotesque, right? And it involves a dark humor. Like, again, in Beckett's Endgame, which is a one-act play, which was published in the year 1957, where the protagonist Nell says that nothing is funnier than unhappiness. It is the most comical thing in the world. It involves that sense of irrationalism and helplessness, right? Now, the third characteristics is that it rejects the realistic setting, the logical reasoning, and the coherently evolving plot, right? So it's majorly a parody to the traditional plays and the dismissal of the idea of the well-made plays. In these plays, there is no plot, right? There's no major story that's happening, right? The events that are happening, and those events also majorly land down into nothingness. So they are presenting that anguish of the human existence, trying to make sense of the senseless and communicate what is incommunicable. It involves that tragic farce, right, where the events appear to be comic, horrifying, and absurd at the same moment. So these are the major characteristics of the theatre of absurd. So this is one of the most important slide from the exam point of view. You mark it 1 star, 2 star, 3 star, or how many stars you want to put on it. These are all the important authors and their books along with their publishing dates in a chronological order, which is a must learn. Like, you have to learn them by heart. And in order to help you learn this, I've also tried to make a mnemonic for this. So let me just read out all the important books and their authors. The first one is Alfred Jarry, Ubi the King, in 1896. Then is Alfred Camus, Myth of Sisyphus, 1942. Samuel Beckett, Molly, 1951. Samuel Beckett, Waiting for Godot, 1952. Frederick Dürrenmatt, The Visit, 1956. Samuel Beckett, Endgame, 1957. Harold Pinter, The Birthday Party, 1957. Eugenides Ionesco, The Rhinoceros, 1959. Harold Pinter, The Dumb Waiter, 1960. Edward Albee, Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf, 1962. Harold Pinter, Homecoming, 1965. Tom Stoppard, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are Dead, 1966. Harold Pinter, Betrayal, 1978. And Eugenides Ionesco, Bald Saperno, 1980. In the next slide, I'm going to teach you the mnemonic to learn all of these. So now, let me teach you the trick to learn all those books and their authors. So for that, I've tried to create a story that will help you learn, right? So it's a kind of a mnemonic, right? So let's begin. So there was a person by the name of Alfred Jarry who was made the king. So it's Alfred Jarry, Ubo the king. And the king was too stupid that people compared him with Sisyphus, right? So here comes the Myth of Sisyphus by Albert Camus, who keeps pushing the stone up and down. And in the process, he gets a molly, right? So if he gets a molly, he ties it on the hand. And hence, we have Samuel Beckett's Molly. So he's happy and ties it on the hand and begins to wait for the god. So it's Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot. And his visit, right? So again, this is Frederick. The visit is by Frederick Doramat. And he thinks that once he meets God, he will be free from the cycle of birth and death, and hence this is his end game. Again, a book by Samuel Beckett. And he plans to celebrate his birthday and give a birthday party. So the birthday party is by Harold Pinter. To the Rhinoceros by Eugenides Inasco. And his honor, the dumb waiter. Again, Harold Pinter, who's afraid of his wife, Virginia. This is Edward Albee, who's afraid of Virginia, who's coming home. So, Homecoming, again, a book by Harold Pinter. After the death of her two sons, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. So, Tom Stoppard, Rosencrantz, and Guildenstern are dead. She feels so betrayed. Again, a book by Harold Pinter. And hence, she gets herself bald. So this is Eugenides Inasco, Bal Saperno, right? So let me read the story once more. There was a person named Alfred Cherry who was made the king. And he was too stupid. And hence, people compared him to the Sisyphus who keeps pushing the stone down and in the process gets a molly. He's happy and ties it on the hand and begins to wait for the god's visit. And he thinks that once he meets God, he will be free from the cycle of birth and death. And hence, this is his end game. And he plans to celebrate his birthday and give a party to the Rhinoceros and his owner, the dumb waiter, who is afraid of his wife Virginia, who's coming home. After the death of her two sons, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, she feels so betrayed by the god and hence get bald. I hope you're clear with the theatre of absurd. I've tried to deal with each and every concept, but remembered that each and every highlighted portion has to be learned by heart. The author and their books and the dates and the chronology is a must learn. One question is sure from the topic, so you must not miss it out. Okay, so now in the next videos, I'm basically going to deal with each and every book in detail, right? That will be coming up. Have a good day.